I'm an architect and senior management consultant at CVG. And Dena is usually my marketing counterpart. So we like to tag team for a lot of these events and for how we work with clients. We generally work with architects and landscape architects. So it's really great to be with you today. Well, I tested it.
Maybe you have to click OK or be recorded here.
Oh. It's working now. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So it's a small group today, but hopefully we'll have a few more joining us. We have some folks on Zoom as well. But since it's a small group, we're definitely open to questions, comments throughout. So please feel free to chime in throughout any of this presentation. We're going to start with some icebreakers and some introductions, and Dena's going to go over some marketing and business development. I'll follow up with some finance and operations, and we have a few activities to do along the way. Yeah. Okay. So we are from CVG. We are a fully remote company. So it's really great when we do get to see each other in person and not on screen. We do basically everything on this screen, which is a little bit of leadership, HR, finance, like I said, marketing and BD, and then management. So basically anything that's not design. And we don't go very deep into legal or IT issues, but everything else is sort of free game and how we like to help our
proposals or award submissions.
Yes, that's Dena's concern. So we do a lot, but we also have fun. So this is sort of the vibe of our company. We ride scooters together sometimes. When we do get together in person, we try to have some fun. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, sure. So we thought it'd be great for all of you to meet each other as well, and maybe share where you're from, what firm you're with, and what route you're with. Do you want to go around first? I work for myself.
Ensuring our business.
Once a couple weeks.
It's really yeah, you're so so they're kind of like small scale. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's Yeah. We started. We're only on number 15. So it's kind of like but anyway, so yeah, we're looking at
We just met them.
to build 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, everyone, we'll continue. Have a chat. It's more time to have share. So some of the things we think about when we think about a sustainable, healthy, growing firm are answers to some of these questions. So what kind of projects? How are you different from your competition? Who is your competition? Thinking about who your clients are, who your ideal clients are. How you talk to them. So it's a very holistic approach. I think sometimes people, especially around business development, maybe feel a little like it's the sales effort over here that many people are terrified of or don't know how to even approach. So I think sometimes the easiest way is just to really think about some of these questions and the answers. And of course, getting into growth and finance and what all those targets look like. So when we think about marketing and business development, does anyone know the difference between the two? We don't care. You know, you're not allowed to answer though. Well, we can talk later and make sure my answer and your answer are at least similar, right? So marketing speaks for you when you're not around. It speaks to the public when you can't do that. Business development is exactly the opposite. So that's when you are hands-on and having direct conversations with interactions with people. So you can look at it this way. Driving awareness, keeping it top of mind. I call it throwing up a flare. It's those little efforts we can make to make sure people know you exist. Business development does the rest. You're going to build those relationships, figure out what people need, how to give it to them, make them apply it. As an example, here's some marketing activities. This is the stuff we all probably think about when we think about marketing. All the pieces and parts of a marketing plan, the things out in the world, our social media, anything we do in print, advertising, all those award submissions. Business development looks a little bit different. Those are those face-to-face interactions. Those are figuring out which events to go to, what to do when you're there, what to do when you return, and have follow-up to make. Does anyone have a CRM? Does anyone know what that is? You use it? I feel like this is the crazy holy grail that I talk about a lot, is what is it, how do I set one up, how do I use it? And all it really is a system to track these interactions, and having that is really important so that your efforts don't go to waste. But also follow-ups, reminding yourself to do those multiple times. Sometimes these relationships take years to build. And what a person you might meet today, you might have a project from 3 years from now, as you probably all know. Oh, that got a little funky. So thinking about business development in a really holistic way and from the big picture standpoint is all of these things come into play. And I think a lot of it is not necessarily just business development, but they all feed into it. And I think the culture of your firm often has a lot to do with how your firm can grow and change over the years. I think of business development as professional development. It's something everybody should know about, understand, and have a role in. And that role is going to change depending on where you are in your career. And I think it's a really important aspect of business development that people don't necessarily think about in this way. But if you're a new associate, it's going to look very different than what a principal does every day. If you're the office manager, you can also participate, but it's going to look very different than what that associate is doing. These are three of the things that can, kind of three of the areas of focus. So you're going to really build valuable skills. People who know how to do business development, know how to think about it, become incredibly valuable team members. It's your reputation, and that's going to go with you your entire career. So whether you're at the same firm for a long time or you're moving around, that's going to be a huge piece of maybe how and why. And you're really building a foundation, not only for your own future, but whichever firm that you. So here's a look at some of the actual things you can do at those different levels. So in the valuable skills category, designer might be working on a blog post, writing. Please write. I think it's a really, really important piece of building that reputation. And again, it makes you a very valuable employee. If you're an admin, you might be helping maintain that CRM. Might be managing up a bit and helping people track what they're doing, reminding people to follow up. Any other ideas in these categories? Any other valuable skills? Any surprises? Any of this maybe you didn't know was business development? Oh, yeah.
I'm surprised it's so regimented, so divided. And I know some, we have a larger firm and smaller firms, for like a one-person firm is still all of this, right?
Absolutely,
But I
yes.
think, as a principal myself, I do admin, I'm a project manager, I try to do social media. I mean, it just seems like we're in a different era where everyone does everything.
That's true, but also a lot of times principals are doing things they shouldn't be doing. Your time is incredibly valuable. And so are you doing the right thing? Should you be doing social media? And I think it also falls into your passions, right? What are you interested in? What you like to do? And you're absolutely right. This looks probably more regimented than it really is because there's always blurry lines. There's always a little gray area. There's tons of overlap. But just from some ideas, if you are a person new to business development and you're trying to really start building a culture of business development, these are some of the suggestions for ways you can jump in. I think sometimes people earlier in their career think, well, I can't go out and talk about the firm. I can't pitch to a client. And so these are ways you can start bringing them along. Also invite them to so they see you in action. Yeah.
I see another pattern in here is some of these can be done by AI. Right now.
Yeah.
To write the blog post or article as a generator.
Yep.
The ones that are human oriented are less likely. The ones where you're meeting people, but putting together award submissions, that CRM, these are all assisted or augmented.
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably should put edited a blog post or article because I think once you do generate, but it still needs your touch. It still needs your brand voice. And yes, AI can do some of that, but it's also new, right? We do things every day using AI, but it's not yet, and it will be, sure. But again, skills people need to learn. It's a different way, but good point for sure.
But the processes for your deliverables, your drawings, I don't say like a tech team or anything like that. Some people that sustain your efforts in using technology to deliver your design solutions.
Do you think that's part of business development?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That client satisfaction?
Yep.
We'll get there. I'm gonna keep people telling me about it. See if this is going again. Hello. Any thoughts? Clicker's not working. There we go. So with building reputation in mind, some different ideas. Any other ideas? Any new ways of looking at it? Are these things you guys do regularly? Anyone?
Something like these things you don't usually do during your work hours.
Mhm.
You plan it work hours. But
You do it off
sometimes-
work hours?
Sometimes I feel like you plan to attend events, you don't like to go to events during work hours, but something to focus. So those feel like you think about work all the time, or what, how do you kind of
Yeah.
separate?
Well, I think it's part of creating your own business development habits is setting time aside. And again, at different levels, you're gonna probably spend more time. Some principals, how much time do you spend? on business development?
Me,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah, see?
See you, everybody. You're welcome.
But your designers can't, right?
Well, I think it's an excellent question about what business development is and how you focus your time. Because, 100% of my time, every opportunity is an opportunity to do business development. Even when you're working on a project, it's like, wow, what a great idea. I'm gonna call the client, tell them what a great idea. We're providing great value added service, and maybe we'll write an article about it, et cetera, et cetera.
And it all starts to flow and come together and connect.
But I think even like designers, associates, they should be thinking about what they're doing as business development. I mean, they should you gotta focus on your work, but if they come up with a great idea for stormwater remediation, they should think about that in terms of.
Write an article about it, talk
Yeah,
about their
write an
point of
article.
view.
Why not?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think landscape architecture is such a great profession for that. It's really easy to get an article in, let's say, your magazine or, California Native Plant Society, that kind of thing. There's great venues to reach out.
I think like the new generation of designers, they are hustling, like, I don't even think we have to pull any team, like, people are, I'm not saying they're self-serving or anything, but they really are excited to share what they do. And I feel like, when they like to post, they like to talk about what they're doing. And it's different from growing up where it feels like, oh, what do I do? Do I have to talk to people? I don't feel that way with now. So we're getting hit up constantly, how can I do more? It's kind of nice.
Yeah. That's incredible. I think it's also a really great opportunity for mentorship. That becomes where business development meets culture. And again, you're bringing people along, letting them know how you think.
Yeah. But in terms of the time commitment, Sam, it isn't like, okay, in an 8-hour day, you're gonna give 1 hour to business development. It's more like, you're constantly thinking about it, and once a week you take a half hour to write something.
Yeah,
or
definitely.
to draw something like that.
Even if it's passing on an idea to someone on your part. I think too that I've never worked with any kind of company that didn't tell me that most of their work came from girls. And so that client service is massively important business development activity. It's just taking good care of your clients because they're going to talk about you. They're going to resonate. Again, thinking big picture and long term, same thing. Some of the things that you can do to really be a part of that process at different places, different levels in your career. I love to remind clients of other services, asking questions. What else are you working on? Like having those casual conversations outside of meetings with active projects can be really interesting too.
Sorry.
No, please.
But I love this chart, but it's not just for the designer, younger people. It's not just joining any group, join a group that you're passionate about.
Absolutely.
You love native plants, join California Native Plant Society. Big fan of that. You love working with lighting, join that. I mean, I think
Volunteering in the same way, right? Following your
Yeah.
passions.
well, that's how you build your network. start with what you're passionate about, become an expert, and then build upon that.
It's just
have a small company. We all kind of participate in just about everything. We do have a dedicated marketing. You know, we all help each other. With a little bit of crossover. But in terms of what the principal does to be efficient with their time, that's definitely something that I'm working on. Thank you. I was late because I was developing a few different storylines for a project that we just completed. So trying to develop those little nuggets that could be developed into a story or other writing pieces.
Yeah, to capture them in real time, because you're gonna forget 2 weeks from now. It's a building process for that, right? Don't have it right now, time to right now, but that way you capture it.
Oh, it might have been on your previous slide, but, you know, going to, speaking with your clients at conferences, kind of that like social currency that, you know, I'm sure it's a regular client and they talk about your services and it has that word about back to sure. So having clients speak for you too.
Yeah, and I think social is great, because I think sometimes they'll ask you to go into this talk. But getting to just know some other person. Sure. So thought we could take a little time and just let's start. Let's start making a business development plan. Let's start thinking about the people that you you probably are overdue. Growth there. Maybe some people that you wanted to meet, maybe it's a contractor or an architect that you know should know you. Should have a relationship. What would that be? Let's just take 10 minutes and let's just do it.
I know.
Yeah, right now, right now. No time like the present. Here's your business development time for the week. Let's take 10 minutes. Just to see, because I think it's really interesting to see how, 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to see what's top of mind. And then you can do it right later. True. Oh, the windows, that's the other side. Oh, so nice.
You text. I will talk to her.
Are you actually reaching out to someone right now?
Yeah. Okay, no, we don't call anymore.
No, they don't. I used to do sales years ago, so we were on the phone all day, every day. And then suddenly. Started.
Yeah.
It's on Twitter.
Maybe I'll try. Sometimes people read a text, don't respond. Okay. I was, write an email and call.
That sounds like.
Oh. Hard, writing. It looks like it might be slowing down. I know. If I'm like. I don't know.
There's something.
Everybody done? Ish? Yeah. So, has anyone heard the term superconductor? In reference to people? You have? It's the wild card element. I think we all know at least 2 or 3 people that always seem to be the one that knows stuff. They're gonna introduce you to someone, they're gonna tell you about a project. Those people are also ones to add to your list. And maybe you are one. Could be aspiration. So this is a super easy way, just doing this little personal business development plan, like everyone on your team. It's good practice. So same thing, just some ideas on how to build your network. Don't feel like it's broad enough, or you need to refresh it. Here's some ways early in your career you might do that. It's interesting to think about networking with people your own age, people that you went to school with, because of course you're gonna have a long career together. And people that are your former classmates will one day be principals, decision makers. So keeping those relationships alive is important. Next one, have a network or mid-career stuff. Start expanding. More school. And principles. Getting into the legacy, thinking about legacy, thinking about mentorship.
So question is like for more like introverted people, it's not like their role to do business development, but it's kind of, some people just don't go out as much.
But the introverts can write. You can find ways in your comfort zone as well to reach out and build a network. So when you're thinking about doing that outreach, I think the hardest thing is people think when you're doing business development, you're calling to ask somebody for work. And it's never really that. It's really just trying to keep those relationships alive. So there's lots of ways you can reach out and offer something rather than ask for something. Share something, just let them know you're thinking about them. All easy ways to do this. One of my favorites on this list is checking in on projects you've lost. Because I think that's a really interesting way to show how important it was to you, how much interest you have in that client. And sometimes it's not going great. So that could be another reason to throw up a flare, but good way to keep in touch. And maybe show there's no hard feelings. If we want to take a little more time, if everyone's into it, we don't have to, we can keep moving, but take that list that you made and maybe start adding to it. Especially the middle one. Some of those people that you thought about, how can you be helpful to them? What can you offer? How to make yourself invaluable. There also some questions. Don't have any questions? Before we pass it on to Erin, talk about what to do with all that money you make.
How do you in that, how do you differentiate yourself from the more traditional salesperson that's going to be talking about fear, uncertainty and doubt and why you need to do this because you're going to fail? How do you, first of all, identify these people so that you know that that's what you're dealing with, not somebody that has your best interest at heart? And how do you differentiate your message so that people don't perceive you as just doing the same thing?
I don't think, I mean, I think fear is definitely an overused tactic, but I still think it's very, especially when you're trying to build long-term relationships, kinds of clients that you are under. I don't think fear is, I don't think people respond well to fear.
It might be because I'm thinking more of the software industry.
Yeah.
That they are selling licenses and seats and not
Right.
service.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's lazy too, right? It's an easy tactic. But I don't think it's a very short-term strategy. Because people very quickly realize, oh, I've just been sold something.
Yeah.
And I think sales is at its best when you're not being sold to. And really, to me, it's really thinking about who those clients are. Who do you want to work with? I always think that one of the best things to do is think about your top 3 clients in your whole career. Who are your favorite people you've ever worked with? That's who you want to find for. So what do they need? What do they respond to? You know, right? And so just remembering that, sharing with everybody else, and just keeping, people do client personas, but just base them on your real clients. You don't have to make it up. So you know what works and what doesn't work with them. You know why they said yes to you. And I think maybe not fear, but I'm figuring out what their pain points are, really worried about. And that to me is more helpful. You're trying to solve for them. You're not trying to scare them into saying yes about something. So that's probably better. Anyone else?
So a lot of the great information and presentation, a lot of it is about like, how do you find the opportunity and get your foot in the door? But like, I find the harder thing is like, how do you close? How do you actually get the project? And I can't tell you how many times I read an RFP like 100 times. I think I know exactly what they want. You don't get the project, and then it's like, oh yeah, it says it right there. And so, like, I don't know, somehow, like, I guess my question is, how do I become more successful? How do I get my hit up? Success rate.
Yeah. You just described missing something in an RFP. So I think maybe getting more eyes on it, bringing your team in to help you strategize, maybe having a team that's going to be like each person will be responsible for a different part based on their expertise, maybe can help. Because I know sometimes, and RFPs are different every time. And again, I'm not an architect. I don't do proposals unless you want fresh eyes to edit. But again, just from a sales perspective, you can only share what's real. Right? So I think just putting your best foot forward and making sure the right relevant projects are attached. But there's something to be said for back channel. And really starting to think about who else is going after this, whether it's a contractor, or someone else, where you can maybe think about those pain points. You can create a capture plan specific to a project too. Get all the players listed. So take that same idea of creating like a little 1-sheet BD plan and do it for a project. What are the main pain points? Just make sure you're addressing all of those, but also figuring out who really the decision makers and who you need to maybe do a little outreach to beforehand. And I think there's a lot to be said for just showing enthusiasm and excitement. The harder you work to make sure they know you want that job, I think that really carries a lot of weight to it. All that.
I saw the comment
Yeah.
about repeating.
Oh, I missed
Check.
that. I don't even know.
Can you
Oh.
hear clearly? The people on Zoom?
That doesn't look like it. I suppose you're all facing away.
Well, I will repeat the questions. Is there a microphone somewhere here?
It's just that one,
Yeah.
okay.
Or should I put this round?
Oh, sure, maybe right there.
Yeah.
We'll capture a little bit more that way.
Can you hear us on Zoom? pretty well. Is that on?
Yes, and types of questions. So
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
we'll
Okay,
do that.
awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Something happens when we do something in Zoom and then it lets the ability to click. There we go. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about financial management. Is anybody doing financial management for their firm right now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so this might be very familiar to some of you, might be new to others. So, bigger question, does anybody do financial planning? Planning is the hard part, I think, and it's the thing that you get busy and you forget to plan. If you don't have a plan, then when you do get busy, it's hard to just execute. So I'm a big advocate for actually planning, setting some goals, so you can then strategize, create tactics to get to those goals. So here's a few ways to think about planning and things that we help our clients do. So we set financial goals every year, and usually that's a revenue goal as well as a profit goal. We manage that by actually making a budget. Does anybody make a budget for your firm? Excellent. Usually that's the last thing that firms do, because you kind of know it's the same every year. You increase a little bit, but budgets can help you see where you're over or underspending. And when the economy is a little bit volatile like it is now, it helps you to see where you might be able to cut costs a bit and just maybe be a little more cautious if you're feeling like you need to be. So we will talk about all of these, but really I want to start on revenue. So we often think about net operating revenue, which is different than just your gross revenue. And what this is your revenue minus your direct expenses. You get your net operating revenue. And to further clarify this, the revenue is all the cash that you're bringing into the firm. From your project work, from your reimbursables, consultants, but all the money that's coming in. Your direct expenses are your cost of goods sold. So obviously the reimbursements, your consultants, everything that's not direct labor though. So sometimes we see firms adding direct labor. This is your salary costs that are your direct labor costs. We recommend not putting that in your cost of goods sold because you're paying salaries regardless of the work being done and the revenue coming in. So salary costs, direct and indirect, typically go in operating expenses. The one point that you might want to change if it's not set up that way. And then all of this, revenue minus direct expenses, again, equals your net operating revenue. If you have QuickBooks set up correctly, this can be the gross profit line in QuickBooks. So that might be noted. So when we're looking at profit, we then start with a net operating revenue, the cash that stays in your business, subtract the expenses, which are determined by your budget, and then we get your profit. Now, in landscape firms, bigger firms, we typically see a 15 to 20%. That's a goal. If that's not where you are now, it's okay. Goal to get there. Firms that are under 500,000 in net operating revenue, probably closer to that 5 to 10%. But the goal is really to eventually grow to get to 20%. Usually that happens by becoming a slightly bigger firm. So let's talk about revenue planning. Does anybody have a strategy for how you use revenue planning? How do you do it?
But in the Bay Area, because of the inflated cost of living and consequential salaries, I tend to take the it's 33% of the sorry, if you take the salaries and do the reverse math, it should be like 33% of annual revenue for your operating expense.
And then you increase that every year so you know what your revenue needs to be, the money you need to bring in to afford
There's
that.
two different, you could do it like that, or I do it based on operating expenses.
Right.
Question. Are you talking about percentage in terms of, it's blank, percentage in terms of, margin? Like,
Well, so what's your big number? Does anybody have a revenue goal, that number you're trying to hit at the end of the year?
growing at a certain margin versus
Yeah.
growing at a certain like percentage of. That's my question. Here's 33% in margin, well, 20, that's a 25% margin. Sure. That's growth.
I'm saying if you're paying, $1 million. If you're paying your employees like $200,000, that should be 36% of your revenue.
So what I'm
Not more.
taking from this is that you actually are thinking about your revenue goal, which is good. You have a formula that you're trying to develop. Most firm owners that I talk to, it's a gut feeling. I think we can make this year because we made this last year. And we'll go up just a little bit because, inflation. So the fact that you're trying to calculate it and predict it is good. I'm going to show you another simple way that can help those of you who maybe don't do it yet, figure out what that revenue goal could be. And it usually starts with utilization rates. And utilization rates are, this is just some standards if you don't have utilization rates yet. These are a little bit oversimplified, I think. Most firms at this point for PTO, this blue chunk, getting closer to 15%, where I see most vacation time, holidays, all of that. But what you're seeing is designers have the highest utilization. They spend the most time on billable project work, and it reduces with each level within the firm. With a principal, generally 40 to 60% billable, depending on the size of the firm. So utilization rate is the billable hours of direct time spent on projects divided by the total hours worked. And best practice for an entire firm, when you look at everybody you have on staff, is going to be about 60 to 65% of all time should be spent on billable work. If you're in a really small firm, it's actually hard to get to that 65% because you just don't have enough people necessarily, especially if you have an administrative support person who's closer to 0%. That 0 takes a long time to overcome to get to that 65% best practice. So we like to do revenue projections that are capacity driven. So that really means looking at your staff, each individual person, and their ability to work on billable. Like how many hours they spend that are billable. So to oversimplify this process, if I am a principal, there are 2,080 hours in a year. That's assuming 40-hour work week, 52 weeks per year. Utilization, I'm assuming, is 50% and a billing rate of $200. And just a reminder, adjust your billing rates annually if you're not doing that, especially in landscape. Your projects tend to last a while if you're doing any of those planning projects. You want to make sure you're not undercutting your rates before the project even begins. Okay, so the way we find direct hours is basically multiplying that 2080 times the assumed utilization target. That's how you get the direct hours. But the goal here is to figure out how much revenue, theoretically, each person in your office can bring into the firm. Again, this is theoretical, but it is a way to think about how much billable time can any individual actually spend, and then you can bill on their behalf. So you want to go through this. It's over $200,000. It's solid. You want to go through this with everybody that you have on staff. So takeaway here. Everybody has a different utilization target based on their role. Everybody has a different billing rate. But when you look at the potential billable dollars for each person, it's still hovering just above $200,000. So this is not always the case, but in my example, I just noticed this morning that somehow the math worked out. But you wanna be honest with what the utilization target would actually be. If somebody is spending time on marketing, then they're not gonna get to as many billable hours as somebody who's not assisting with marketing. So I tend to be pretty conservative with these projections, just because you don't want to overinflate that revenue goal. So the bottom line here is about $650,000 in potential revenue. But if you've been around a while, you might know that in your gut, that's too much. You're not gonna bring in that with the people that you have on staff that year. So usually there's a little bit of a gut check here. And it might be that 550 is what you actually think is possible based on past performance. So that adjustment factor is an 85% of the potential capacity. That's your billable ratio. This is reverse engineered for those of us who need that. This works for me. If anybody uses Monograph, this is your realization ratio. Or if you're looking at Monograph reports, those two terms are interchanged. So the billable ratio, if a definition, yes, is the revenue achieved divided by the potential. So it's that difference between what you could have done and what you actually brought into. So best practice, 85 to 95%, which it's hard to bill for every single hour that you work. You can, and I highly encourage you to do that. But the best practice is usually about 90%, and that would be a solid place to start. But if you can get above 100% and make more revenue than the time spent working, that's your actual goal. Want to get you to that point. That generally means charging higher fees. But really profitable firms are definitely above 100%, 120, 150% sometimes. You might have just an epic year and you don't want to budget for that to repeat itself, but you can consistently get 105%, 10% and slowly build up how you're invoicing to be more profitable. Does anybody do this type of revenue projecting yet?
No, but the utilization rate, the 80% you took out PTO. How do you, because we've been having a battle over this in the office and determining utilization.
Yeah, so
And because PTO is now higher than in the past.
yes.
It's pretty difficult with that and with like regular staff meetings, things like that, for anyone to be 80%.
I agree with that. So this
So is the PTO just carved out, tossed away, or?
So there are a few different ways to do utilization, and if you're using software,
Yeah.
there are two schools of thought. We typically take PTO out of the 100%. Not all software does that. And some software will show it to you both ways, PTO in or PTO out. And some software even increases your utilization rate if you're working overtime. We try not to actually budget for overtime, but it is possible to get to 85% utilization with your 15% PTO and non-billable time for some staff, but 85% is the absolute max that I've seen. I think 80 can be achievable if somebody is just a designer. They're really focused on design work only in production. When you start adding in marketing or social media or other things that you might want a designer to contribute to, that's going to impact their ability to get to that utilization rate.
But then is the 2,080 hours, is that?
No, that's a 40-hour week with PTO. So we look at all of the time available in the year. We try to adjust for the PTO that an individual would have, and then the amount of non-billable work they would do, and then what's left is their direct time, their utilization. And that's just a target. So things happen over the year. I mean, people go on maternity leave, they take leaves of absences, all sorts of things impact the assumed utilization rate. And we evolve throughout the year and make adjustments, but we try to make the best guess that we can at the beginning of the year, so we do have a goal. And the best way to really start with this is to look at past last year, what that performance was, and make some adjustments. Any other questions?
Well, just so I understand, if you go to the next slide, 85% is the next one. I'm sorry, the one that got you to 85%. Yeah, so is this a blended rate of staff, associates, principals are achieving a ratio at 85%?
I wouldn't call it a blended rate because it's actually looking at their individual rates and what the total would be, and then making that adjustment based on this number, but you could use a blended rate as well.
I just wanted to know, in your experience, what is a typical billable rate or like what's the percentage typically?
Oh, it varies. I think every principal I work with now is over 200. In the Bay Area, I only have one client here, but I would think.
Oh, sorry, not the billing rate, just billability, the percentage.
Oh, the percentage? So in a small firm, it's between 40 and 60% typically for a principal's utilization rate. If you're in a firm with a lot of principals, you probably divide up some of that non-billable work. So that maybe one principal would be 60% because they're working on more projects, maybe they're the design director. But somebody who's doing maybe more of the business development and proposal writing might be at 40%. So it doesn't have to be the same. Yeah, I like to see it above 40. Sometimes it can dip below that, but usually when that happens, the principals aren't very happy. So usually they want to do a little bit more of the project work. So getting below 40 is not always what a principal wants.
Are there advantages to having a utilization rate in that range, or is there an advantage to being higher?
So it really depends. There's really important work that a principal has to do that only a principal can do. If that principal is great at doing that non-billable work and they're really efficient at it, or they have other staff who are helping them be more billable, then that could be adjusted. If you have multiple partners and you're dividing up those non-billable tasks, that's also another option. And every firm functions a little bit differently, so you have to find what works for you. But around 50% is a good starting. And then adjust it from there.
So can we go to the next slide?
Oh, sorry, one question up first.
So when you said that 85% was the utilization rate or target, and then you had and then you had the 15% PTO, let's just say. Wouldn't that be the designer possibly to achieve that in over the hours in a year?
Usually it makes this red bar, the other
so
non-billable would
less-
go down.
Less non-billable, but increasing billable and having more time off. Got it.
But these bar charts, I like making these bar charts for every staff member because every person's different and what they're working on that year changes. Somebody might want to help with social one year, but then they're over it the next year, you're going to pass it on to somebody else for that opportunity. So you can adjust these based on what your project load is and what individual goals are for the year.
Question from the chat, does this account for lost revenue? Writing all the time to over.
That is a great question. No, this does not. So write-offs usually are not. They can be budgeted. Usually I put it in the operating expense. So you're planning for a loss rather than in loss revenue. I mean, I would recommend try to write off as little as possible, but if you know historically you always have some write-offs, then it is better to plan for it in some way. Okay, I'm going to move forward. That's okay. There we go. Okay. So we have a revenue goal now. And again, this is just one other way to sort of check yourself if your revenue goal makes sense. And this is sort of complicated to look at, but what we always calculate is your backlog, and that's the amount of contracts you actually have signed. These that are remaining that you have not invoiced yet. So that's your backlog. Prospects are the potential projects that you typically send out a proposal. And then suspects are projects that are floating out there that are pretty loose. You haven't done much to get that project yet. So with backlog, we typically adjust to 90%. So assume that you're going to get 90% of the contract fee. Hopefully get 100, but we try to be conservative with this estimate. 50% for prospects, and that's assuming you have a 50% win rate. Your win rate's higher or lower, you can make that adjustment. And then because suspects are really loose, we only count them at 10%. So when we add up all of this, actually, can you move this? Do you mind? Okay. So we want to add up these three totals, and that is your gosh, which word up here? Okay, net revenue forecast. There's a lot of equations up here. Okay, so the important thing is you want to add up these three numbers to see what you have in your pipeline. When you have that number, you want to, so this is your net revenue forecast, that's adding them all up. You want to compare this to the revenue that you're projecting your firm would have. So that first portion of your revenue goal divided by 12. This is your monthly billings goal to get to your revenue. Okay. Then we want to divide your forecasted revenue by your monthly goal to get the months of work that you have in your pipeline. Oh, I lost you. Okay. This pipeline is pretty healthy. It's 11 months of work. What we really like to see, what I like to see, is that half of your pipeline is in this backlog column. I like it to be 6 months. If it's a little less than 6 months, it makes me a little nervous. But this one is healthy at 11 months. When you start getting 15 months, probably gonna feel stressed about your workload and need to hire. But every firm functions a little bit differently. So your backlog, depending on the work you're doing, the project types you have, might be comfortable when it's less than 11 months, or you feel confident that you have repeat business, it's fine. So this is just sort of a rough rule of thumb. Any questions? This is a giant spreadsheet again. So the point of this is to really look at what your pipeline is and see how that compares to your revenue goal. At the beginning of the year, if you don't have at least 6 months or so of that revenue projected in your pipeline, you might have to adjust revenue goal. Might be a little too aggressive based on the work that you already have. So this is just a way to double check that that revenue goal you set is feasible. Let's move on. Did we get?
I don't know, like,
Okay, to the other side is budget planning. So again, just as important as the revenue planning. Okay, so these are just some of the categories that you might have for annual expenses. The best way to start a budget, if you don't already have a budget, is to look at your P&L. And at the beginning of the year, it's great to look at last year's P&L as a starting point and make some adjustments to your spending, what you're budgeting and what you're anticipating to spend based on what you did last year. So I like to look at the percentage of your revenue goal that is taken up by each of these categories. So in other words, actually, can you move that back? I'm really sorry. I had not anticipated the Zoom menu.
I don't know, just makes this smaller. That's right, yeah.
Okay. So this is how,
Oh, wait, I need.
oops, there we go. This is the breakdown of what we typically see as a budget for landscape architecture firms. And you'll notice this big chunk, 55% is wages. And then another 8.5% payroll burden. So the vast majority of every firm's expenses is taken up by payroll. So this is why if you're anticipating hiring at some point in the year, you have to anticipate that salary in advance. You have to plan for it. Make sure you have enough revenue coming in, or that revenue goal accommodates that intended future hire. A few things that might be surprising that I know Dena wanted to talk about. This little blue sliver that didn't even get a label. It's most firms' marketing budgets. So less than 1% is what most landscape architecture firms spend on marketing. Architecture firms spend closer to 4%, maybe 6%. So if you're thinking you might want to do a little more marketing, you probably should, because it's probably under budgeted at this moment. Where landscape architects, I think, are luckier than architects, in that you tend to share the cost of photography. And see that architects' marketing budgets is dominated by photography, when I think landscape architects are better at sharing that cost. Does any of this seem surprising to anyone when you're thinking about your own budget?
Yes.
How so?
I think somebody at SBA who does marketing, I think we actually spend more on marketing. And we spend a lot on insurance, I think.
You know, this is from the network of firms that we work with that are fairly small. But insurance is definitely lower for landscape than we see with architects as well.
Software. Is that under cost expenses?
Yes, typically everything that you don't have a home for goes in office expenses. So it's really anything you would need to do, whether or not you have a physical office. So all of those expenses that are required fall into that category.
What does payroll burden mean?
So that's all the taxes, all the fees, the health insurance, other benefits that you probably are paying for fall into that category.
That we're health insurance and medical benefits, health insurance and all that stuff.
All that stuff's in payroll burden, plus all the
Payroll
taxes.
tax.
Yeah. I mean, it varies. And again, this donut is the average firm revenue. Some firms go up and down in their revenue size, which obviously impacts the percentages here. But what you will see, profit, this peach color, almost 20. So it is possible. And these are from small groups. There we go. Okay, so we already talked about a bunch of this, but when you're thinking about profitability, the number one thing that I see impacting profitability is the fees you're charging. So if you're not profitable, I mean, the easiest thing to change are your fees. So I'd encourage you to critically think about those fees. I know everybody wants to reduce their fees. There's so much pressure in the marketplace, but you're a business and you do have to make profit to maintain your business. Profit is not a bad word, though sometimes it seems that way. Okay, for those of you who are already thinking about financial planning, does anybody have a 5-year plan? It's good, it's okay. we'll walk you through this. So it's helpful to have a growth plan so you know what you are trying to do. All of this changes, but if you don't think about where you want to be in 5 years, how are you going to get there? So the way that we would typically start this would be to look at the past 2 years and what your revenue was, what your expenses were, what your profit was, and start tracking this and looking at it. Now, what you'll see is, you know, there's some ups and downs. That's very normal. You want to look at that trend line and hope that it's positive. You want your revenue trend line to be at a higher angle than your expenses trend line. And you want to, you know, mostly have profit if you can. Maybe not every year you will, that's okay, but as long as you're trying to grow. And then we do a projection for this year. So that's basically doing that capacity driven revenue planning that we talked about at the beginning. And then the rest of these are pretty formulaic. So you'll see like, this is the trend line I was talking about. It's a very conservative growth trend line. And it will never look like this. This is the theory of what you're trying to do. There's going to be ups and downs, but you generally want to be trending up. Operating expenses, because they're so dominated by payroll, is really figured out by the number of full-time staff that you have. So FTE is typically how we calculate this. So based on past year's performance, you would want to divide your operating revenue, your operating expenses by your FTE. And if you hire somebody in the middle of the year, that's a 0.5 FTE. It's not a head count. It's the amount of time they're working in your office. So all of these are really determined by that FTE count. How is your office growing? How many people are you adding in a year? And typical growth would be 1, maybe 2 new hires per year, or 0.5. That's okay too. But you want to be fairly conservative to maintain that growth, at least in your long-term plan. So this is what I was talking about with your trends per FTE. So it's basically just dividing your numbers, your revenue and your operating expenses by FTE. And this is what you then multiply to get your annual revenue goal and your intended operating expenses. So these are multiplied to get these taller bar charts on this chart. Does this make sense to everyone? So what we're seeing here, and Monograph just published some new information, but looking at expenses per FTE and revenue per FTE is really important because, especially in San Francisco, where it's very expensive to hire anybody and keep them happy with their salary and payroll burden, you really do need to make sure your revenue per employee is worth it. So just a few years ago, we were really recommending revenue per FTE could be 130 to 150 and you'd be okay. That's not really the case anymore. We're seeing Monograph, I think, just published 180,000 as the average revenue per FTE, but going up to 200 is better. So the numbers that you used to maybe calculate for that break-even rate are just continually increasing. So this is just a spot check each year that you can do at the end of the year to see if you're utilizing your staff efficiently.
When you're calculating your FTE, are you including all staff, including administrative staff that don't really bring in much of a
Yes, every single
So that
person
would
is
be the
counted
average.
here, including.
the average per employee? I imagine brought down by the number of admin you have, and yet I imagine you would advise to have too few admin because then brings down the billability of each technical staff.
Yes, it's always a balance of when to hire that administrative staff.
And so what would you say is an appropriate support staff to technical staff ratio?
So I generally see the first administrative staff is hired between 6 and 10. employees. By the time you need a second, 15 to 20-ish when you get that second. But it's something you do want to plan for. That first one is scary, but I think the second one's even scarier sometimes. Because the first one might be a lower paid administrative assistant. Second one tends to be a little more expensive. Not always, but if you need a little more help, independence or marketing, you might have to invest in a more experienced staff member for that second administrative position.
Well, I imagine if somebody is higher, has higher level skills, they're taking away some responsibilities or needs from higher level, with highly billable staff.
Exactly.
And so, well, worth their cons.
Yeah, so what I like to recommend when you're thinking, should I hire, should I not hire? I don't know. If the principals can track their time, which I know you're all tracking your time, right? But if the principals can categorize how they're spending their time and break it down in a way that your new hire, your new administrative person would be spending their time, you can see that you're spending 10% of your time on HR or 5% of your time on IT issues as the principal. And it begins to make the investment for an administrative person make sense because you can do the math and say, well, principal can be 20% more billable. Makes sense to invest in an administrator.
Certainly higher bill grade.
Exactly.
Are you putting marketing staff into?
Yes, so anybody who's primarily non-billable is in that
And
administrative
that would also
category.
be.
Yeah, if you have a bookkeeper, usually that's sort of outsourced, that might not be an FTE, it depends how you. Any other questions?
Another question from the, what is the point of growing if the profit is staying the same? Seems like 25 plan, but you do more.
Bigger budgets. Yeah.
That is a good point, and I probably should pick another example. This is a firm that we work with. But
But you mentioned earlier, the larger the firm, the bigger the profit.
I mean, these numbers are technically getting bigger, but they're still too small. And I think it's hard to think about that profit and what it will be. I do think this should be more aggressive than what this firm is planning. This firm was intentionally very conservative. So you can certainly have a more aggressive plan if that's palatable to you. But it really comes down to what the principal wants. This firm actually was not wanting to grow significantly with their headcount. So if you don't want growth, it is going to limit your profitability. Oh, more spreadsheets. Okay, but the point of this was really to just divide your annual revenue and expenses by your FTE. So this is really sort of the formulaic way to calculate your growth year over year and projecting forward. So, but again, I mean, you can see profit is flat at 14%, which this firm is comfortable with. Not necessarily what I would recommend. I'll pick a better example. We are almost at time, so I think we'll skip this breakout activity. You have a question?
I have a question. I don't know like what the right part of the presentation to ask it is or on like what slide necessarily, but I was curious if you're gathering any data about profitability of types of projects like master planning, versus doing schematic or concept design, design development and working drawings. And I've heard, anecdotally that firms are doing this and not doing that, or doing this because of X, Y, and Z, and just kind of wanted to think about the framework because, it's also a spectrum and a continuum of services, right? So.
Yeah, no, I would encourage you to look at the profitability of every project. If something lost money, why did it lose money? How do you correct that? How do you prevent that from happening again? And it might impact your business development plan. So if you know, if one project type you want to work on is to break even, and you're going to have to supplement that with other projects that are profitable, so you can maintain your business. You might want to look at the percentage of those project types as your business development goal. How many break-even projects can you tolerate? How many loss leaders can you tolerate? And then you have to work with some developers to make sure you still have some profitability. So I'm going to give you this activity to do on your own, just to think about. So when you're setting a financial goal for the year, and there's so many goals, so many things you could improve. The takeaway here is that to typically set a financial goal, there's going to be an operational improvement as well. So if you don't have a financial goal yet, there's probably a reason for it. So getting to the root cause, what's preventing you from having that goal, and fixing that is part of the goal. So there's operational improvement typically tied to that financial planning. And you can't improve your financial planning without doing an operational improvement as well. They're tied together. Okay. So we can have questions here, or we can have more questions over drinks. And are there any Zoom questions that we didn't get to?
No.
Any Zoom questions? Okay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your time. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with finance. Okay.
Presentation, can you share as attendees?
Yeah, we can share that.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you.